My house was destroyed by a devastating fire. At 65, I went to seek refuge at my son's place, but he turned me away, claiming his fiancée needed privacy. Desperate, I called my first love, a man I hadn't seen in 4 decades. When he opened the door to his mansion, he spoke just 3 words. "You finally came home." My life was changed forever. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. We love to know how far our stories travel. My name is Grace, and at 65 years old, I thought I had already experienced every kind of suffering life could throw at me. I was wrong. It all started on a Wednesday that seemed just like any other in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was in the kitchen fixing my afternoon coffee when I smelled something strange. I decided to check, thinking maybe I'd left something on the stove. When I opened the living room door, I was met by a wall of smoke so thick I could barely see through it. Flames were already consuming the curtains and racing up the walls with a speed that left me paralyzed for a few crucial seconds. The smoke detector should have been screaming, but I found out later the battery had died months ago. A simple oversight that would cost me everything I owned. I ran back to the kitchen, fumbling for the phone to call the fire department, but the smoke was everywhere, making it hard to breathe, impossible to think straight. I heard glass breaking and realized I had no time. The flames were eating my house with a ferocious hunger that seemed impossible to contain. My only thought was to get out alive. I grabbed my purse, which was on the kitchen table, and bolted for the back door. The last thing I saw before I burst outside was the portrait of Robert, my late husband, starting to blacken from the heat. The neighbors were already in the street when I stumbled out, coughing and gasping. Mrs. Jenkins, my 78-year-old neighbor, was the first to rush over, hugging me as we both watched helplessly while the fire devoured the home where I'd lived for over 40 years. The fire department arrived in 10 minutes, but it was already too late. They managed to keep the blaze from spreading to neighboring houses, but mine was beyond salvation. In just 1 hour, 4 decades of memories were reduced to ashes. The kitchen table where David used to do his homework, the walls that held the marks of my son's growth, the bedroom I shared with Robert for 37 years. It was all gone. I stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in a blanket someone had put around my shoulders while the firefighters did their work. Later, they would tell me it was likely a short circuit in an old living room outlet, a simple electrical problem that turned my life into ruins. The flames finally subsided, leaving behind only a blackened, smoking structure. The fire chief approached me, his face smeared with soot, his eyes full of a pity I couldn't bear in that moment. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We did everything we could, but—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. I could see it for myself. A total loss. Everything I possessed, besides the clothes on my back and the contents of my purse, had vanished. The neighbors who were lucky enough to still have homes took me in for the first night. Sweet Mrs. Jenkins insisted I stay with her, but her small apartment was already crowded with visiting grandchildren. The American Red Cross had set up emergency shelters, but the thought of sleeping in a gymnasium full of strangers made me feel even more lost. That's when I knew I had to call David. My son lives about a 40-minute drive away in Ballantyne, a posh Charlotte suburb with tree-lined streets and houses that look lifted straight out of a magazine. He moved there 4 years ago when he was promoted to regional manager at the insurance company where he works. We weren't close, not the way mothers and sons should be, but he was all the family I had left. I used Mrs. Jenkins' phone because mine had melted, along with everything else. "David, darling, it's Mom," I said, my voice weaker than I intended. "Mom, what's going on? You sound upset." "There was a fire, son. The house is gone. Everything's gone." There was a pause that felt like an eternity. "Were you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. Just a few scrapes and a scratchy throat from the smoke. But I need a place to stay while I figure things out, just temporarily." Another pause. "Sure, Mom. Come on over. We'll work it out." The relief that washed over me was so intense, I nearly collapsed. My son would take care of me. Despite all our distance, all the missed calls and awkward holiday dinners, he was still my boy. I spent the next morning staring at the charred ruins, waiting for the insurance adjuster to arrive. He showed up promptly at 9, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, surveying what was left of my home with a clipboard and a camera. "Total loss," he said pragmatically, as if those 2 words didn't represent my entire life. "How much?" I asked, although I dreaded hearing the answer. "Well, you had a policy of about $200,000 on the structure, but with your deductible and depreciation, we're talking maybe $90,000, maybe less. $90,000 to rebuild 42 years of life. It seemed impossible. Mrs. Jenkins helped me buy some basic clothes and toiletries with the emergency money the Red Cross had given me. Everything I now owned fit into one small, borrowed suitcase. That was it. It was all I had left of the life I'd built. The drive to David's house felt like a journey to a foreign country. Everything looks different when you have nowhere to go back to. Familiar places, the gas station where I always bought my lottery tickets, the diner where Robert and I used to have Sunday breakfast, all seemed to belong to someone else's life. Now, David's neighborhood was immaculate, as always. Perfect lawns, perfect sidewalks, perfect lives continuing exactly as they had the day before. I felt like an intruder, bringing my tragedy into their spotless world. His house was a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a red door that Victoria, his fiancée, had chosen. I'd met her exactly 3 times in the 2 years they'd been together. She was 30 and he was 39. She worked at a downtown marketing firm and had an opinion on everything from the color of the walls to the type of wine to serve at dinner. I pulled the cab into their driveway and sat still for a moment, gathering my courage. This is temporary, I told myself, just until I can figure out what comes next, just until the insurance money comes in and I can find a small apartment somewhere. I never imagined that walking up to my son's front door with my little borrowed suitcase would be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But as I raised my hand to knock, I felt a familiar sinking feeling, the same hollow feeling I got when Robert died, as if the floor were disappearing beneath my feet. I just didn't know yet how much deeper I was about to fall. David opened the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for me. For one moment, seeing his familiar face, Robert's eyes, my own stubborn chin, made me feel like everything might be okay. He was my son, my only child. Surely blood meant something. "Mom," he said, stepping aside to let me in, but his voice held something I couldn't quite place. Distance, maybe, or discomfort. Victoria appeared behind him almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting in the wings. She wore white jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than I used to spend on a month's worth of groceries. Her brown hair was pulled back into one of those messy buns that somehow looked perfectly styled, and her smile was the kind that never quite reached her eyes. "Grace, how horrible about your house," she said, but she was looking at my ragged suitcase, not me. "David told me what happened." I put my suitcase down in their pristine entryway, suddenly conscious of how I must look. My newly bought clothes, cheap and simple, seemed out of place against the polished marble of the hall. I could still smell the smoke clinging to my hair, despite the shower I'd taken at Mrs. Jenkins' house. "It's just temporary," I said quickly, "just until I can get back on my feet." David and Victoria exchanged a glance, one of those wordless, spousal conversations that excludes everyone else in the room. I'd seen Robert and I do the same thing countless times, but from the outside, it felt like they were shutting me out of a club I didn't know existed. "Let's sit down and talk," David said, guiding me into the living room. Their house was beautiful in the way magazine houses are beautiful. Everything matched, nothing was out of place. White furniture that looked like no one had ever actually sat on it. Glass coffee tables that reflected the light from windows so clean they looked invisible. It was the kind of house you were afraid to touch anything in. I sat on the edge of the immaculate sofa, my new shoes firmly planted on the flawless hardwood floors. Victoria noticed and flinched slightly. "So, what's the plan?" David asked, settling into the armchair across from me, not next to me on the sofa, where he could have put his arm around his distraught mother, but opposite me, as if we were conducting business. "Well, the insurance adjuster said it'll take a few weeks to process everything, maybe a month. I was hoping I could stay here until then. Just until I find a small apartment or something." The silence that followed stretched about 10 seconds longer than it should have. I watched Victoria's face change. I saw her jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. She leaned over and placed her hand on David's arm, a gesture that looked supportive, but was clearly possessive. "Mom," David began, and I knew from his tone that what was coming next would break my heart. "The thing is, Victoria and I have been talking, and we really value our privacy here. We work long hours, and this is our sanctuary, if you know what I mean." I blinked, not quite comprehending. "I wouldn't be in your way? I'd keep to myself. I'll help with cooking, cleaning. I won't be a bother." Victoria leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "It's not about being a bother, Grace. It's about space. This house is our first home together, and we're still finding our rhythm as a couple." "I'm his mother," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "Of course you are," Victoria replied smoothly. "And that's why we thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere else, somewhere you can have your independence while you rebuild." I looked at David, expecting him to contradict her, to remember that I was the woman who had stayed up with him through every fever, who had worked double shifts to pay for his college books, who had held his hand through his divorce 3 years ago when his ex-wife left him for her personal trainer. Instead, he nodded. "Victoria's right. Mom, we think you'd be happier with your own space." The words hit me like a physical punch. I actually felt my chest constrict, as if someone were squeezing my lungs. "Happier, David? I lost everything yesterday. Everything. And you think I'd be happier alone in a hotel room than here with my family?" "It doesn't have to be a hotel," Victoria said quickly. "There are some lovely extended stay places near the mall. Very clean, very safe, and they have little kitchenettes so you can cook for yourself." I stared at this woman who had only been in my son's life for 2 years, telling me where I should live after losing my home. And how am I supposed to pay for this lovely extended stay place? The insurance money won't arrive for weeks. David shifted uncomfortably. "I could help out with that. A few $100 to get you started." A few $100. As if I were a distant relative he barely knew, not the woman who gave him life. "David," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I changed your diapers, I rocked you through your colic, I taught you how to ride a bike, and I helped you with your homework. I held you when you cried because Lucia Velasco broke your heart in high school." His face twisted slightly, but Victoria squeezed his arm harder. "No one's questioning your history," she said. "We just think everyone would be more comfortable with some boundaries." Boundaries. I'd heard that word from the therapist David had seen after his divorce. Everything was about boundaries. "You're kicking me out," I said flatly. "We're not kicking you out," David protested. "We're just saying that maybe this arrangement wouldn't work for anyone." "Whose idea was this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could see it in the way Victoria leaned back slightly, satisfied, as if she had won something. "We discussed it together," David said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking in a way that reminded me I was 65 and alone in the world. "I understand." "Mom, don't be like that. We're trying to do what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language. "What would be best for everyone, David, is if your mother didn't have to sleep on the street tonight." Victoria's perfectly made-up face contorted into an expression of concern. "You don't have to sleep on the street. Like I said, there are options." I looked around the flawless living room one last time, at the family photos that included David and Victoria, but none of me, at the expensive furniture no one was allowed to truly live on, at my son, who had chosen this cold, beautiful woman over his own mother. "You're right," I finally said. "There are always options." I picked up my small suitcase. Its weight felt heavier now that I knew where I wasn't welcome. David stood up, looking uneasy, but not uneasy enough to change his mind. "I'll call you in a few days," he said, "as soon as you get settled somewhere." "Don't bother," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I wouldn't want to invade your sanctuary. Victoria had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but not enough to speak up, not enough to say, "Wait, this is wrong. She's your mother." I walked out of that perfect house with its perfect couple and its perfect boundaries and stood on the sidewalk for a long time before I could force myself to walk. Through the front window, I could see David and Victoria talking, probably about how difficult I was being, how much drama I was bringing into their peaceful lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years after Robert died, telling myself I was strong, independent, that I didn't need anyone. Now, when I truly needed help, I discovered that independence is a luxury you can only afford when you have options. I walked to a little budget hotel on the corner and spent almost all the money I had left on a room for the night. Sitting on the hard bed, staring at the peeling walls, I tried to figure out where a 65-year-old woman with almost no money and only one suitcase of cheap clothes was supposed to go. That's when I remembered the business card I'd carried in my wallet for nearly 40 years, miraculously saved because it was with me at the time of the fire. Yellowed with age and soft from being handled so much. A card I never thought I'd actually use, from a man I loved when the world was young and everything seemed possible. Randall Galloway, the man who promised to come back for me. One day, before life intervened and the day never came, I spent 3 nights in that cheap hotel before I found the courage to make the call. 3 nights waking up with a sore back from the thin mattress and the taste of shame in my mouth. 3 nights listening to arguments in the hallway and the constant drone of traffic outside the badly insulated window. 3 nights washing my few new clothes in the small bathroom and hanging them to dry on the room's single chair. The business card felt like tissue paper between my fingers, worn smooth from 4 decades of being carried but never used. Randall Galloway was written in faded blue ink. Beneath that, a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize. On the back, in my own youthful handwriting, "Never forget G." I had written those words when I was 25, believing with the absolute certainty of youth that Randall Galloway would be the great love of my life. He was 26, with dark hair that fell over his forehead and eyes the color of golden amber. He worked for his father's construction company after college and dreamed of bigger things, of building something that mattered. We dated for 9 months, which at 25 felt like an eternity. He used to take me to the overlook on the hills outside the city where we'd sit on the hood of his car and talk about our plans. "I'm going to start my own business," he'd tell me. "Something with construction or real estate development, something that makes me rich enough to give you everything you deserve. I'll come back for you, Grace." He promised me the night before he left for a project in Atlanta. "I'm going to make something of myself, and then I'll come back and marry you." But promises at 25 have a habit of fading when real life takes over. He wrote letters at first, long, passionate letters, full of dreams and plans. I wrote back, telling him about my job at the bank, about how I was waiting, just as I'd promised. Then the letters grew shorter, less frequent. When I met Robert 6 months later at a church event, Randall felt like a beautiful dream I'd once had, too good to be real. Robert was steady, reliable, already 32 and with a good job at the phone company. He didn't promise me the world, but he promised me a house, a family, security. When he proposed after 5 months of dating, I said yes. I put Randall's business card in the pocket of my wedding dress, a secret talisman I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Now, 40 years later, sitting in a cheap hotel room that smelled of damp and stale cigarettes, I wondered what had become of that dreamy man with the amber eyes. I followed him sporadically over the years, the way you do with first loves. Through mutual friends, I heard he had made good on his promises, that he had started a construction firm, that he had become a big deal. He never married, which surprised people. Too busy building his empire, they'd say. That Galloway was always ambitious. The last I heard, maybe 8 years ago, his company had expanded beyond North Carolina to Atlanta, Georgia, and Miami, Florida. Galloway Development, building shopping centers and office complexes. The young man from the construction firm had become the kind of man who wore expensive suits and made decisions that affected hundreds of people. What would that man want with a 65-year-old widow staying in a budget hotel with nothing but a suitcase of clothes from Target? The rational part of my brain said it was ridiculous, pathetic even. You don't call someone after 40 years because your life has fallen apart. You don't look up your young love when you're old, desperate, and have nowhere to go. But rational thought is a luxury when you're counting the quarters in your purse and trying to figure out if you have enough for one more night's stay. On the fourth morning, I couldn't take it anymore. My back ached from the hard mattress. The money was running out, and the hotel had already warned me they'd need the room for a booking coming in the next day. I sat at the room's little table, staring at the card, my hands trembling beyond just the morning chill. What would I say? "Hello, Randall. Remember me? I'm homeless now. Can you help?" The number on the card was probably disconnected, or it would ring through to some secretary who would politely inform me that Mr. Galloway was far too important to take calls from random women claiming to have known him in their youth. But what if it wasn't? What if he answered? My heart hammered as I dialed the number. Each digit felt like a step off a cliff. It rang once, twice. Galloway Development, Randall speaking. His voice was deeper now, molded by time and responsibility, but unmistakably his. After 40 years, I would have recognized it anywhere. I almost hung up, almost hit the end call button, and went to find some other solution. But something in his tone, some warmth that seemed to cut through the phone and wrap around me like a blanket, made me speak. "Randall, it's Grace. Grace Thorne. Well, I'm Grace Robert now, but I used to be Thorne." Silence. Long enough for me to think maybe the call had dropped, or maybe he'd hung up, or maybe he had no idea who I was. Then, Grace. Just my name, said like a prayer or a wonder, as if he couldn't believe it. "I'm so sorry to call like this," I rushed, the words tumbling out in my desperation to explain before he could hang up. "I know it's been a long time, and I probably shouldn't be calling, but I just didn't know who else to turn to." "Where are you?" he interrupted, his voice sharp with concern. "I'm in Charlotte, at a hotel called the Rest Stop, and I know this sounds crazy, but my house burned down last week. I lost everything, and my son doesn't want me to stay with him, and I have nowhere to go." The words spilled out in a torrent, each one harder to say than the last. Admitting that your own son had rejected you was like admitting you had failed at the most fundamental part of being human. "Give me the exact address," Randall said, his voice now entirely professional. "I'm coming to get you." "You don't have to do that. I don't know why I called. I guess I just needed to hear a friendly voice." "Grace?" His tone allowed no discussion. "Tell me where you are. I'm walking to my car right now." Over the phone, I could hear the sound of a door closing, an engine starting. He was really coming. This man I hadn't spoken to in 40 years was dropping whatever important business he was doing to rescue me from a budget hotel. I gave him the address, my voice barely a whisper. "Randall, I'm not the girl you remember." "Neither am I," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "But I've been waiting 40 years for this call." After we hung up, I spent the next hour packing my few belongings, alternating between panic and disbelief. What was I doing? What were we doing? This was insane. You couldn't just pick up a relationship after 4 decades like you were continuing a conversation from yesterday. But as I looked out the hotel window, waiting for a car I wouldn't recognize, carrying a man who might not recognize me, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the fire. Hope. Maybe it was foolish hope. Maybe it would lead to more disappointment, more heartbreak, but it was hope nonetheless. And at 65, with nothing left to lose, hope was worth the risk. At 10:45 on the dot, a silver Mercedes pulled up in front of the hotel, gleaming and polished against the worn backdrop of the street. I peered out the window as the car parked, my heart beating against my ribs like a bird trying to escape its cage. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see inside, but something deep in my chest told me it was him. The engine shut off, and the driver's side door opened. Even after 40 years, even with gray hair and lines around his eyes, even carrying the weight of decades I hadn't shared with him, I recognized him immediately. Randall Galloway stepped out of that car as if he were stepping out of my dreams, and as he looked up at the window where I stood, the years crumbled away between us as if they had never existed. I grabbed my suitcase and hurried down the stairs with the speed of someone who fears a dream will vanish if she waits too long. He was standing by the car waiting for me. Randall had the same relaxed confidence he'd had at 26, but now it was refined, polished by success and maturity. He wore dark jeans and a navy blue sweater that probably cost more than I used to spend on a month's worth of groceries. But his eyes, those amber eyes that had haunted my dreams for decades, were exactly the same. I wanted to hide. I wanted to go back to the room and pretend this wasn't happening. I looked terrible. My hair hadn't been cut in months. My cheap clothes were wrinkled, and I felt small and insignificant compared to the elegant man waiting for me. But he was already smiling at me, a smile that made my heart jump as if I were 25 again. I walked toward him slowly, suddenly unable to breathe. "Hello, Grace," he said softly. Up close, I could see the changes time had made. His dark hair was now salt and pepper, cut short and professional. Lines bracketed the corners of his eyes and shaped his mouth. He was broader in the shoulders, more solid, as if success had given him physical weight along with everything else. But when he smiled at me, I saw the young man who used to take me to the Overlook and tell me about his dreams. "Hello," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. He studied my face for a long moment, those amber eyes taking in every detail. I wanted to apologize for how I looked, for how far I'd fallen, for calling him after all those years with nothing to offer but trouble. Instead, he said 3 words that changed everything. "You look beautiful." I started to cry, right there on the sidewalk, in front of that budget hotel, with Randall Galloway standing next to me. I completely fell apart. 40 years of pent-up tears, 4 days of uncertainty and despair, a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough. It all came out in ugly, gasping sobs that I couldn't control. He didn't say anything else. He didn't try to shush me or tell me everything would be fine. He simply took my suitcase with one hand and wrapped his other arm around me as I collapsed against his chest. He smelled of expensive cologne and clean laundry, of success and stability, of everything I had lost and everything I never had. His sweater was soft against my cheek, and his arms were strong around my trembling shoulders. "I'm sorry," I choked against his chest. "I'm sorry, Randall. I shouldn't have called. I shouldn't drag you into this mess." "Shh," he murmured, his hand stroking my back. "You should have called years ago." When the tears finally subsided, I pulled away to look at him, embarrassed by the damp patch I'd left on his expensive sweater. I must look like a disaster. He reached out and wiped a tear from my cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. "You look like someone who has been through hell and survived it. That's not a disaster, Grace. That's strength." I laughed, but it came out shaky and bitter. "Strength? I'm 65. I'm staying in a dive hotel because my own son doesn't want me. That's not strength. That's pathetic." His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw a flash of the anger he was trying to hide. "Your son is a fool. You don't know him. I don't need to know him. I know you." He paused, his hands still resting lightly on my shoulders. "Or at least I knew you. And the Grace Thorne I knew would never turn away someone in need, especially family." The way he said my maiden name, as if it were something precious he'd kept all these years, made my chest ache with longing for the woman I used to be. "That was a long time ago," I said. "I'm not that girl anymore." "Maybe not," he agreed, "but I'd like to meet the woman she became." He put my suitcase in the trunk of his luxury car as if it were treasure, not a cheap bag containing everything I had left in the world. As he opened the passenger door for me, I was momentarily stunned by the unreality of the situation. The morning of the fire, I had a house, memories, a life built over decades. Now I was getting into the car of a man I hadn't seen in 40 years, with no idea what came next. "Where are we going?" I asked as he started the engine. "Home," he said simply. The drive took almost an hour, passing through increasingly wealthy neighborhoods until we reached an area I'd never seen before. Rolling hills dotted with properties hidden behind stone walls and iron gates, trees that looked like they'd been professionally placed, mailboxes that probably cost more than most people's cars. Randall turned into a long driveway marked only by a small brass plaque that read Galloway. The drive curved through mature trees and manicured gardens before opening into a circular entrance in front of a house that took my breath away. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was elegant in the way that real money is elegant, subtle, confident, built to last. Stone and wood with tall windows that caught the afternoon light and a porch that invited you to sit and stay a while. "Randall," I whispered, looking at this monument to everything he had achieved. This is incredible." He parked the car but didn't get out right away. Instead, he sat there, looking at the house as if he were seeing it through my eyes. "It's too big," he said quietly. "It always has been. I built it thinking I'd fill it one day, but—" He shrugged, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "Some dreams don't work out the way you planned." "You never married?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "I came close a couple of times, but something was always missing." He paused for a beat, then said simply, "You." The word hung between us in the silent car, charged with 40 years of what-ifs and could-have-beens. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to understand how I could have been missing from a life I was never a part of. But before I could find the words, he was already out of the car, rounding the front to open my door. The house was even more stunning inside. Hardwood floors that gleamed like honey, high ceilings, furniture that looked like it belonged in architectural magazines but didn't feel cold or museum-like. There were books everywhere, comfortable reading chairs placed near the windows, photos scattered on end tables. It felt like a home where someone actually lived, not just a showcase for success. "Are you hungry?" Randall asked, leading me into a kitchen that was larger than my old living room. "I was about to make lunch when you called." I realized I was starving. The hotel breakfast had been only stale toast and weak coffee, and my stomach was cramping with emptiness and nerves. "I don't want to be any trouble," I began, but he cut me off with a look. "Grace, stop. You are not trouble. You are—" He paused, searching for the words. "You are the answer to a question I've been asking for 40 years. While he cooked, and he actually knew how to cook, moving around that huge kitchen with the ease of someone who had learned to take care of himself, I studied the photographs scattered throughout the room. Randall at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, shaking hands with important people. Randall with various women at charity galas and business dinners, always smiling, but never looking completely happy. "Tell me about your life," he said, placing a plate of perfectly grilled chicken and roasted vegetables in front of me. "Tell me about Robert, about your son, about everything I missed." So I did. Over a lunch that tasted like heaven after days of terrible hotel food, I told him about my marriage to Robert, steady and comfortable, giving me security and companionship, if not passion. About David, the baby I had wanted so desperately and loved so fiercely, who grew up to be a stranger who valued his fiancé's comfort over his mother's needs. I told him about the years of being a good wife, a good mother, a good widow, about the fire that had taken everything I owned, and the son who had taken everything I had left. Randall listened without interruption, his amber eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I'm sorry about Robert, about your house, about your son. But I'm not sorry that you called me." "Why?" The question came out smaller than I intended. He reached across the table and took my hand in his, still strong, still gentle, still able to make my heart race after all these years. "Because I never stopped loving you," he said quietly. "Because every deal I made, every success I achieved, every dollar I earned, it was all so I could be worthy of you when you finally came back to me." Randall, I know this sounds crazy. I know 40 years is a long time and we're different people now, but when I heard your voice on that phone today, it was like the missing piece in my life finally clicked into place. I looked at our joined hands, his tanned and well-kept, mine worn by work and showing every day of my 65 years. I'm not the girl you remember. You're better, he disagreed. You're real. You've lived and loved and lost and survived. That 25-year-old girl was beautiful, but she was only potential. You are the woman that potential grew up to be. The words settled around my heart like a warm blanket, healing wounds I didn't even know I was still carrying. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt seen, not as someone's mother or someone's wife or someone's burden, but as myself. What happens now? I asked. Randall smiled, that same devastating smile that made me fall for him when the world was young. Now, we figure out what the rest of our lives look like together, if you'll have me. As I sat in his beautiful kitchen, filled with good food and possibility, I realized that sometimes the fire that destroys your old life is just making room for the life you were always meant to have. Living with Randall was like discovering a version of myself I had forgotten existed. The first week was strange, tiptoeing around each other like polite strangers sharing space. He gave me the entire guest suite of his house. A room larger than my old living room, a private bath with a tub that could fit 2 people, and a small sitting area overlooking his gardens. I felt like I was staying in a luxury hotel, afraid to touch anything or leave too much evidence of my presence. But Randall was patient, the way successful men learn to be, and gradually I started to relax. He had a housekeeper, Maria, who came 3 days a week, but on the other days I found myself cooking for him. It started small, making coffee in the morning, preparing simple lunches. But Randall appreciated everything with the enthusiasm of someone who had eaten buffet food and restaurant meals for decades. "This is incredible," he said one evening, savoring the chicken and dumplings I'd made using my grandmother's recipe. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this in years." "It's nothing fancy," I protested. But inside, I glowed. When was the last time anyone had truly appreciated my cooking? David used to complain that I made the same 5 dishes over and over. Victoria once suggested I try more contemporary flavors for family dinners. Randall shook his head. "It's perfect. You're perfect." That word, perfect, should have made me uneasy. I was 65 with gray roots showing and expression lines that had become permanent grooves. My hands were spotted with age, my body soft in places that used to be firm. I was anything but perfect. But when Randall looked at me, I saw myself reflected in his eyes as someone beautiful, someone worthy of love and attention and gentle care. We fell into routines that felt as natural as breathing. We ate breakfast together on the back porch, where Randall read business reports and I watched the birds at his elaborate feeders. We took afternoon walks around the property, where he showed me the gardens he'd planted himself and the greenhouse where he grew orchids as a hobby. The evenings were for talking. We had 40 years to catch up on, and we did it slowly, carefully, like archaeologists examining precious artifacts. I told him how hard it had been to lose Robert, about the emptiness of the house in the months afterward, about how I had to force myself out of bed every morning, about the loneliness of widowhood, the way people treat you like half a person once your husband is gone. He told me about his business, how it had grown from a small construction company to a development empire with projects in 3 states, about the women he dated over the years, smart, accomplished women who looked perfect next to him at charity galas, but who never made him feel whole. "There was one woman," he said one night, as we sat near his fireplace, the rain drumming against the windows. "Elena, she was an architect. Brilliant, beautiful. Everyone said we were perfect for each other." I felt a pang of jealousy that surprised me with its intensity. "What happened?" "I proposed," he said quietly. "On Christmas Eve 5 years ago, big show, restaurant overlooking the city, expensive ring, everything she said she wanted. And she said yes. We planned the wedding for the following summer, but as the date got closer, I kept having this feeling that something was wrong. Not with her. She was everything anyone could want in a wife, but with me. He paused, staring into the fire. The night before the wedding, I called it off. Randall, no. What did you tell her? The truth. He looked at me, his eyes serious. That I was still in love with a woman I'd met 40 years ago, and it wouldn't be fair to marry her while my heart belonged to someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow. You canceled your wedding for me, for the memory of me, for the possibility that someday, somehow, I might need you, and you would be here waiting? I looked at this successful, handsome man who could have had anyone, and tried to process what he was telling me. This is crazy, I said. It is. He leaned forward, taking my hands in his. It's crazier that you kept my business card in your wallet for 40 years. He was right. Sure, we were both crazy. We were both living with the ghosts of what might have been, but somehow, against all odds, our particular brand of crazy had brought us back together. 3 weeks after my arrival, David called. I was in Randall's kitchen making dinner and humming to myself. Actually humming, something I hadn't done in years, when my phone rang. David's name on the screen made my stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Hello, dear, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mom. His tone was odd, carefully controlled. I've been trying to call you. Your phone keeps going straight to voicemail. That was true. I'd been screening my calls, not ready to deal with whatever guilt or obligation David might try to impose on me. I've been busy. Busy doing what? I heard you checked out of the hotel weeks ago. Where are you living? I looked around Randall's beautiful kitchen, at the fresh flowers he'd brought home that morning, at the expensive wine glasses on the counter. I'm staying with a friend. What friend? Mom, you don't have friends with money. His assumption offended me, partly because it had been true for so long after Robert died. I'd let most of my friendships fade, too tired and too proud to maintain relationships when I had nothing to offer in return. Would you be surprised? I said, coldly. There was a pause, and I could practically hear him processing this information. Mom, I think we need to talk. Victoria and I have been discussing the situation, and we think maybe we were too hasty. Maybe you could stay in our guest room for a while, just until you get back on your feet. The offer that would have meant everything to me a month ago now felt hollow, insulting even. What made you change your mind? Another pause. We realized that maybe we were too focused on our own needs. Family needs to stick together. What he meant, I realized, was that he'd probably heard through the neighborhood gossip network that his mother was no longer staying in a cheap hotel. Someone had mentioned seeing her with a well-dressed man in a nice car. David was curious, and curiosity had made him generous. That's very kind of you, I said, but I'm perfectly happy where I am. Mom, you can't just move in with a stranger. It's not safe. What do you even know about this person? I know he's never made me feel like a burden, I said quietly. I know he values my company and appreciates my cooking, and he tells me I'm beautiful every single day. The wedding wasn't like my first one. When I married Robert 40 years ago, it was all about what everyone else expected. White dress, church ceremony, reception at the community center with a DJ and a cash bar. We invited everyone we knew and several people we didn't particularly like because that's what you did. We performed the ritual for the community, not for ourselves. This time, Randall and I did exactly what we wanted. The ceremony took place in his backyard on a crisp November morning, 5 months after that phone call in the hotel. The pastor was an old friend of Randall's, and the only witnesses were Maria, the housekeeper, and Marcus, Randall's business partner and best friend of 25 years. I wore a simple blue dress that Randall said matched my eyes, and he wore a gray suit that made him look distinguished and handsome. No fuss, no fanfare, no stress of impressing anyone. Just two people who had found each other again after 4 decades, promising to spend whatever time they had left together. David came to the wedding. I had debated whether to even invite him, but Randall convinced me to try one more time. He's your son, he said simply. You'll regret it if you don't give him a chance to make it right. So I called him 2 weeks before the ceremony. Randall and I are getting married, I said flatly. November 15th at 2 o'clock. You're welcome to come, but Victoria is not invited. He showed up alone, looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He shook Randall's hand politely. He made polite small talk and even managed a strained smile when the pastor declared us husband and wife. But I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he took inventory of Randall's house, his car, the obvious markers of wealth. This morning, I woke up in Randall's arms, in my husband's arms, in the room that became ours, in the house that became our home. Sunlight streamed through the windows overlooking the gardens we tend together, and I could smell the coffee Randall makes every morning before I wake up. At 66, I am happier than I've ever been, not because of Randall's money or his beautiful house or his success, but because someone sees me, truly sees me, and chooses to love what he sees. The fire took my old life, it consumed it, and turned it to ash. But sometimes I think, as I watch Randall read his morning paper across the breakfast table, destruction is just another word for renewal. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you truly needed. And sometimes, if you are very, very lucky, first love gets a second chance to become forever love. The business card I kept for 40 years is framed now, sitting on Randall's desk in his home office. A reminder that some promises are worth keeping, even when it takes 4 decades to deliver on them. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.